fan of the Naked Gun movies?
Not really. I never got into them. It just felt a bit, I don't know.
They're schlocky for sure.
Thank you. That's, yeah.
But there's great moments. One of them was Leslie Nielsen alone in a room writing a secret code down, and all he had to write with was lipstick. Someone startles him from behind, and he turns around. She asks what he's doing, and he just starts putting the lipstick on and says, "Well, a guy's got to look his best, even though he's alone. Know what I mean?" And just nonchalantly walks out the door.
Brilliant, especially in the time of that was the 80s of like
I think that one was 90s. That one came in the
okay.
90s. Yeah.
I was gonna say still like lots of homophobia going on. So the fact that they went there, just willing to put lipstick on him, good
It
deal.
wasn't that big of a, let's not make him out to be more brave than he really was. Yeah, I mean the man worked with O.J. Simpson. That's bravery, I think.
Yeah. Was this pre-conviction or pre?
Oh yeah, very
Okay.
much so. Yeah. He was. I think OJ was more known to me when I was young for those movies than football, because he had. I don't know if he'd retired by the time I started. Like, was old enough to start really paying attention to football. But I don't remember him playing. I remember him mostly from the movies.
Yeah, what movies was he in? Because I remember him being in a movie and he was like a paraplegic, and it was a really good movie, and I
Really?
cannot remember it. Yeah.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yes, because I remember seeing clips of that on that documentary about him. But I can't recall which movie that was. I don't think I ever saw
Oh,
it.
it's gonna drive me nuts. But my mom was watching it and I watched it, and she's like, "Yeah, that's O.J. Simpson." Or I saw it in the credits, and this is several years after the trial in what, 94.
Right.
So yeah,
He wasn't a half bad actor, was he?
no, he was really good. He was very compelling. So it's gonna
Yeah.
drive me crazy. I'll look it up later and probably never
Yeah.
find it, but long ago memories. So well, Billy, what's the good news? What's happening? Exciting things
Well,
going on in your life.
what's
Like a
it?
birthday? Your
Oh
birthday's coming
yeah,
up?
Tuesday.
Yeah, it's
Tuesday is the
been,
big day. Doesn't mean anything anymore, does it? Did it ever?
I mean, I sent some flowers to my sister for her birthday at the end of February. And I said, today we're celebrating the fact that your mother carried you around in her vagina or in her womb and then pushed you in her vagina 9 months later. Congratulations. Like, really
It's
celebrating the moms. Like, they really did all the work. You just
it's
happened
something to
to
mark.
mess up.
It is kind of weird to think about, right? Like, when did we start celebrating birthdays? When did that become important?
I think as
You're the
soon as
historian.
yeah, no, seriously, I think it really was when we started really keeping track of, actual dates with calendars. There's the Gregorian calendar, and then was it the Julian calendar, and all these different modes of recording time. But you go to Prague and they have a name day clock basically, and there's 400 names on it, and every single person in the Czech Republic is named one of these names, their first name. Legally, it has to be. And then they have whatever middle name they want. And that's usually what they go by. So not only do you
Wow.
have a birthday, but you also have a name day. So you get to celebrate both. So I think that idea of celebrating someone at least once a year on a specific day has been around for a very, very long time. Now, where that was rooted, I don't know. Like, it's with infant mortality rate, you would think that just wouldn't be quite as important as maybe it is now.
If you didn't know your birthday, how do you think that would affect you? You ever think about that?
Uh, I always tell people, I'm like, we don't talk about it. It doesn't happen. Not because I'm getting old, just because it's always incredibly disappointing. It's January 2nd,
Yeah.
and everybody's, hungover, they're broke, they're out of town, they're sick. I mean, just a whole myriad of excuses not to celebrate my birthday, which is fine. So I just make it as low key as possible. And I think it affect my life for the better, to be honest, if I didn't know it. Because then I could choose any day, be like, that's the day I'm going to celebrate,
Oh,
whatever
certainly.
this is.
I think about it because I recently read a biography on Sonny Liston, in which kind of described how he never really knew when he was born, and no one ever does. or no, I mean, no one knows exactly when he was born.
Mhm.
And the author was talking about like his last fight with Chuck Wepner, and I think Sonny Liston was listed at something like 35 or something at the time, and Wepner saying like the guy had to have been at least 45. Like
Mm.
but no one knows. Like, can you imagine like just going through life like not knowing exactly when you were born?
Yeah, or even like a specific age. I mean, I guess if you're within 2 to 3 years, it's not a big deal, but those milestones can be really important when it comes to aging and health and that sort of thing. So in that respect, that would be disconcerting. But actual day, I mean, it's whatever. It's just
I
like
imagine it would be kind of freeing too to just not
yeah.
really measure time that way.
Yeah. How many times you made it around the sun without falling off the earth or really messing up your mom's hard work over those 9 months? I mean, I do
It
that anyway, but at
remi-
least I have something to show for it. I'm still alive.
No, I know what you mean. It reminds me of another article I read too about a guy in Afghanistan who let's see. So this the guy who wrote the article, Major Danny, who's also been on the podcast, he was talking about serving a tour over there, and he ran into this old man, and they had this conversation. Kind of asked the old man when he was born, and the man had no idea based upon dates. He just
Mhm.
never measured time that way. Didn't have access to a calendar apparently. It
Right.
just never came up. And so he mentioned that he was born in the year of this one particular king, I think. And so Danny went back and he did some research and discovered that the guy had to have been a little over 100 years old. And
Wow.
I thought it was really cool that like this guy's lived for a century having pretty much no idea how old he was, the way that we have ideas about how old we are.
Right.
So I don't know why, but that story just kind of really got the old gears turning, I guess. Made my imagination run a little wild. What that would be like to really just live a century. I'm sure he measured time somehow, right? By harvests or I don't know, his favorite
Yeah.
television programs, you know, being
As long as
renewed or
your
canceled.
SVU is still going, I am really old now.
I'm sure he was marking that off on tallies. so, so in a hut somewhere, I imagine, but not measuring it in the way that we do. I wonder how that affects one's personality and disposition.
I mean, overall life quality too, if you think about it, if he doesn't even know he's 100, people walk around saying, "Oh, I'm 30, I'm so old," or, "I'm 55, it's all downhill from here." And they
Hmm.
have that mentality, and that can really wear on a person, whether it's about your age or anything else. So, not knowing, he just doesn't have it in his mind that at this certain age, I need to be at this point in my life, or this is what my health should be like, or, all these expectations. So, is it some sort of maybe not placebo effect, but I guess kind of that, just that there's no way of, or maybe not placebo effect. But yeah, you're just not, how am I trying to phrase that? You're just not setting these expectations and trying to live up to them. You just live your life.
Hmm.
And I think that that may cause him to stay healthier and younger for far longer, because he's not looking to fulfill those specific milestones and then being either disappointed by them or worried about them. So I think like you said, it's freeing. You remove a lot of that negativity and stress from your life that is aging.
I could see that for sure. I think I might be a little bit happier if I didn't feel I had to measure it the same way that the rest of society measures these things.
Absolutely. It's weird how we deal with time in Western culture. I remember reading this bit about how a lot of Eastern cultures deal with time, and we speak of it as something we can possess. I have time, or I'll give you some of my time, or let me steal some of your time. And a lot of Eastern cultures don't see time that way. Time is not ours to do with as we choose. Time happens around us and to us. It is not something we control. And
Hmm.
I really like looking at it that way, that it's not within my control, that I am, it's not something that I have and that I can
Right.
spend as I choose. It's going to happen anyway. So I think it's a really fascinating way to think about how something that is really, in a way, a social construct. We made clocks, we made
Hmm.
sundials. The days aren't exactly 24 hours long. And what we do during those set hours is all constructed by our society. And so thinking about how we think about time, I think really changes the way we, again, spend it. We just don't have another language for it either. How we spend it, how we choose to use it, or pass it.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, it hasn't been that long since we started using clocks, is it?
Mm-mm. I
I
mean,
mean,
yeah, I mean, like I said, there's sundials, which have been around for a very,
mhm.
very long time, ever since you could put a stick in dirt, really.
But actually having access to a portable timepiece has been relatively recent in our history.
Yeah, last what, 300 years or so?
Oh, so yeah, I guess so. As far as like your average guy on the streets having one, I think.
Oh, average guy, it's got to be 100 years, maybe
Yeah,
150 with that.
yeah. When did the pocket watch come out? 1800s, 1700s
I think 1800s for trains was the big
for
one.
trains. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. To
Well, I
keep
guess
things on
clocks
time.
were mostly invented for commerce, right? Ships. Is that right?
Um, I that I couldn't say. I would say more for trains though, because those have to be on time. If
Right.
they're not on time and you're not keeping schedule, people will die because you run into another train or whatever, And so that is very precise. But before that, I guess there was no need to keep such strict standard time. I mean, ships kind of showed up when they showed up.
Hmm.
That depends on the weather, but trains, rain or shine for the most part, unless you're in England and it rains and forget it, all the trains shut down because logic. But UK transportation system. But yeah, I think the trains really changed that. And I think things like trains and obviously the Industrial Revolution has affected how much how what our culture is like today. But I think the trains really started it all because it could transport mass goods, mass people, and it had to be very regulated and people had to be aware of the time. Like it was one thing for the church to ring out the bells at noon or every half hour. That was how people kept time. But that really strict, it has to be here at 11:05 p.m. Church bells weren't ringing every minute. So I think that really strict standardization of time is really modern, all said and done.
I think you could be right about that. Do you know what time it is, by the way?
I don't. I'm gonna guess
Ah,
25.
absurd. That's
Yeah.
absurd. That
I
was a trick
actually.
question.
Oh, I mean, well, and the reason you asked that is I'm one of those people that someone asks, what time it is. It's probably actually 12:22, something along those lines. When you just know what time it is instinctively, or like when you wake up before your alarm, that's a stress hormone. That's not
Stress
good.
hormone.
It's a
No?
stress hormone, yeah. Yeah, especially when you're waking up before your alarm. People say it's habit, and it's like, no, it's a stress hormone that'll do that to you instead
Where
of
does
just
the
being
stress
able to
come
sleep.
from? Is it stress from fear of oversleeping, or is that stress because is it ingrained within us because we are somewhat programmed to rise with the sun?
I would say stress because I mean, if you're rising before the sun, yeah, it could be stress of not waking on time, being late to work, not getting the kids off to school on time, things like that. I think it's the stressors of the day that you've carried into your sleep, and then you're waking up early
Hmm.
to deal with all those stressors.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I certainly live in constant fear of oversleeping, I guess. I'm not used to getting up so early. That's not how I'm meant to be.
Me either. Total night owl, and that's another thing throughout history is or not American, sorry. Humans are not meant to be sleeping for 8 hours at a time for these long time blocks. We are meant to sleep, 3 to 4 hours at a time, get up, do stuff, sleep for another 4 hours. So these long extended naps, basically, be up in
Really?
the middle of the night doing things. Absolutely. Yeah. It's the Industrial Revolution that changed that with well, what used to be a 14-hour workday, but now an 8-hour workday, 5 days a week regulated that. So you have a certain amount of time to work, a certain amount of time to do life, and a certain amount of time to sleep. Whereas, jobs didn't
Hmm.
used to be regulated by that. You could go do your work for a little bit, go sleep, and then come back. But a lot of people used to, and there was a fascinating documentary, I want to say on the History Channel before, like when the History Channel still did history. And they were talking about people at night in like medieval times and the Renaissance. They would get up in the middle of the night and go hang out with a friend and chat for a while, bring a candle with them,
Hmm.
and go back and get some more sleep. Yep, because we're not
I
meant to
w-
do.
I would have guessed that we were meant to sleep through the night just because there's nothing else to do in the time before electricity, right? Like I would have guessed that staying up all night came more with the Industrial Revolution, with the idea of being able to keep lights on all the
Yeah.
time, and that the opposite was true. We were probably meant to sleep more. I guess that's my amateurish anthropological.
No, it makes perfect sense. But no, they would just, like I said, light some candles and go hang out with their buddy down the street, and
What did
then
cavemen do though at night? What were they up to at night?
trying not to die would be my guess. Keeping the fire going. Keeping the fire going.
Oh yeah, I suppose that does make sense.
I mean, have you ever tried to keep a fire going for a long time, Billy? It is a lot of work.
Oh,
It
I
is a
imagine you have to
lot of
do it in
work.
shifts. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a fire pit outside, and just trying to keep that thing going for 2 hours. I'm like, how did we burn all of this wood already? So I don't think we're very good at keeping fires going, but it's a lot of work. And I do think about that stuff when I'm like, wow, this is the only thing people had to use to cook, to keep themselves warm, to give themselves light. And
Mm-hmm.
without it, the human race probably never would have evolved to be where we're at. It's fire and heat and light, and that how important that is to our survival, whether it's in the form of fire or electricity or natural gas or whatever it is. But yeah, I think about that kind of stuff, and it just blows my mind how we were able to do it. Things
Mm-hmm.
we can do now are amazing, but just basic survival is so incredible. It really is. How the heck did we do it without our smartwatches and you know
Right. Well,
cars and
and how did we forget it all too? How quickly we abandoned all those instincts and necessary training, I suppose, in order
Mhm.
to survive. You have to really go out of your way these days to learn how to do these things.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, depending on where you live, when you undergo such training, you're looked at as a bit of an oddball,
Right. You're like,
which
where's the underground bunker and all of your canned food?
exactly, it's kind of strange how that stuff works, right? When in so many ways it seems perfectly sensible to want to practice those skills that have gotten us this
Mhm.
far.
And yeah, they are good skills to have. Again, you never know when something crazy is going to happen. I mean, you saw, so being out in Nashville Christmas Day, I'm working at home, and which requires internet, and a bomb went off about a mile away from my house. So that was wild because it took out AT&T, which meant that I had no internet. My roommate had no cell phone service, period. No
Mm-hmm.
data, no texting, no nothing. I was on T-Mobile, so that service I couldn't even get enough internet to do like a hotspot. I mean, it was just one bomb, one homemade bomb, pretty well placed, and that took out everything for days on Christmas Day, and how it showed really how weak and delicate our infrastructure is.
Mm-hmm.
What if that
Yes.
had happened all over the country? And it took down 911 systems in
Right.
several counties. Like, it was not just Nashville located, it was a good part of Middle Tennessee that really got affected.
So
So,
how long were you without these services?
oh gosh, Christmas was, I want to say what that was on a Friday or Saturday. I think it was Sunday night till we got the internet back. So it wasn't horrible. I mean, I went into the office where the internet was fine, but it was definitely terrifying for a little bit, not being able to have that communication, speak with your family. And once upon a time, we didn't have that option. If you
Mm-hmm.
didn't have your family there, you wrote letters or went to a payphone and made a long distance call, whatever it was. We didn't always have that communication. And I think how much that frightens us now, not having that tech at our fingertips at all times, feeling isolated. Pandemic aside, there's still that isolation there without that modern communication.
What is the latest on that? Well, last time we
Oh,
casually talked about it, seems like very little was known.
yeah. So, guy was basically a disgruntled white guy that fed into
Man.
QAnon and some of those big conspiracy theories. And he was a former IT worker,
Oh.
entrepreneur, basically. So I think he had worked for AT&T on those specific servers. So he knew where to go.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what he was doing. I think the biggest thing that scared us was this part of a larger thing, and no, he was just his own self-isolated, mental health case basically. And the police knew about it. His girlfriend had reported him. So Billy, the really important question here though is, she knew this man was
Hmm.
had needed some probably psychiatric care, and was feeding into all of these conspiracy theories, and reported him for making a bomb, yet she was still his girlfriend.
Hmm.
It's very interesting. I'm like,
Yeah, it
what is going on?
sounds like I got to reach out to her for an interview.
Yeah,
What-
definitely. Please
yeah.
do. What
Well,
were you?
can you put yourself in her place at all? Can you imagine, like, being in a relationship with somebody and sticking around despite some serious warning signs like that? I mean, I can imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I speak with people every day, and it's so easy for me to say you need to leave him or her. You have
Hmm.
to put down that ultimatum of the relationship is over if you don't get help. And so for your listeners, I help people get into drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers. And I'm like the admissions coordinator or case manager.
Hmm.
So I speak to people every day. They say, "How am I going to get my loved one some help?" And I just say, you have to if getting a DUI isn't a consequence, being hospitalized for this isn't a consequence, losing their job, you are the last thing enabling them to keep doing what they're doing. You have to put down that ultimatum, leave them. Well, we have 3 kids and a house, and I'm like, they're never going to get help if you don't. And it's so easy for me to say that, but I remember being in my relationship when it was tanking, and I couldn't leave, and there was nothing particularly violent or horrible going on. It was just a dissatisfactory relationship and
Hmm.
marriage. So it's easy to say that. So, yes, I could absolutely imagine putting myself in her shoes. Maybe to her, he was absolutely wonderful, but he had this side of him that was completely separate, or, maybe she wanted to keep an eye on him because she felt like she was keeping him sane. I've definitely been in that position where you feel like you're holding someone together. And if you left, they would just lose it. So who knows what her logic was, but it's very easy to understand why she wouldn't just leave. Definitely.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, without knowing the rest of the story, as it pertains to them, maybe she thought she could help him. Maybe she thought that it wasn't serious. I mean, I think I'm noticing a huge, I mean, anecdotally, of course, but a huge uptick in people indulging in conspiracy theories. I mean, there's a lot of disgruntled white people out there, not just dudes, but ladies. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a disgruntlement, very pervasive, I think, in the culture right now. And I think a lot of the reaction to that is to indulge conspiracy theories.
Hmm.
Something that right now is being looked upon as a right wing problem, but I see it as a problem that does not know any political affiliation. I think human beings are really kind of big on this stuff. I also think it's because it's easier. It's so much
Yeah.
easier to have something to blame for our problems.
Yes.
You know.
It's hard to accept the fact that the world sometimes is just absolutely awful, just as it is, surface level, because that means that it's common, that it's every day. But with these conspiracy theories, means there is some evil out there doing this work, and that the world is really wonderful if it wasn't for this. You just want to say, no, that's just not the reality of it. Just the world isn't great a lot of times for a lot of people, for most
Mhm.
people. The world is a very cruel, unkind place. And it's like you said, it's hard to accept that that's the way the
Well,
world really is.
I think we know a lot of it is crumbling. A lot of these old structures are losing their meaning and losing their legitimacy. Like I really, really think so. And I think COVID has really taught us a lot about that. I think COVID has
Mhm.
taught us a lot about just like how feckless and out of control all of our governments are, east, west, rich, poor,
Yeah.
how out of touch politicians are, and how little power they all ultimately really have. And
Mhm.
I think in some ways it's very, very exhilarating, but it's also of course very disorienting, and people really are having a hard time with that. And so there's no choice in these matters, um, for many people, other than to turn inward, right?
Right.
To just focus on themselves or focus on what's right in front of them. And in some ways, that of course makes perfect sense. And then it's probably the best thing to do is, focus
Right.
on your family, focus on your health, etc. But it also, of course, indulges, I think, a dangerous selfishness, right? Where we
Yeah.
stop seeing any meaningful connections anymore. And the connections that we do start to see have no meaning. And, but we want to give it meaning. But
Right.
again, hence conspiracy theories. Everything has some kind of structure that is tenuous, not real.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately too. I think there's a huge collective delusion happening that we're
Yeah.
all either participating in or doing our best to try to get out of. Do you see that somewhat with the the problem with addiction and some of the people that you talk to?
Oh
A
boy.
willful wanting to just check out, right?
100%. And that's the thing really is we as a company are busier than we've ever been in our entire history when at a time when there was lots of people that had health insurance and lots of people that had disposable income to spend on things like a quality drug and alcohol rehabilitation program, and more people than ever are calling in. They've lost their job and health insurance, and both maybe one spouse has lost a job, so that extra income is gone, and more people are struggling with addiction now than ever have. And you spend all this time alone, and I know I've personally struggled with addiction. Speaking of yearly dates, I did get my 2-year sobriety on March 1st.
Mazel tov.
Thank you, thank you. So there's no chips involved in my sobriety except maybe some potato chips to celebrate, but that's fine. I actually went to the gym instead. Woohoo! So yeah, it's people are isolated, they're alone. People who were sober, a lot of people have a lot of people have relapsed.
Hmm.
In Pennsylvania, liquor stores were deemed a necessary business. Um,
They were here too.
yeah, so and it's everywhere. Yeah, because it makes so much money. I don't
Right.
know if they're saying people have to have alcohol. Some people do, or they will die. But then there's
Yeah.
the people who may have, drank a little bit too much, or maybe, they were a little bit too into their opiate medication, whatever it was, and it just spiraled because they had nothing else to do.
Right.
And people who didn't have a problem suddenly do. I was talking to my doctor, and she was saying, because she appreciates me speaking to her about addiction. She's like, I don't know a lot about it, but I like that. I like learning about it so I can help people better. And she was saying, I see how it is so easy for people to become addicts. She was finished with her telehealth one day. It was 3 p.m., busts out a glass of wine, and her husband stops and says to her, what are you doing? It's 3 p.m. Why are you drinking? And she's like, well, I have nothing else to do. So that made her pause and really reevaluate,
Hmm.
where do these habits come from? I worked with a gentleman who, I won't say where he was at or anything, but he was a funeral home coordinator. And, early pandemic, when, there were literally piles of bodies coming out of literally piles of bodies coming out of nursing homes. And he had to hire a refrigerated truck and move his patients to these refrigerated trucks after they had died, stacking bodies in them, and never had an issue with alcohol, full blown alcoholic now. And I get it, man. If I
Hmm.
had to do that for the people I was supposed to be taking care of, it just sounds like something out of the freaking Holocaust, piling up bodies like that.
It's funny you
Um,
mentioned that. I read a book not too long ago about Auschwitz, and I guess for the first time I kind of noticed, and I'm sure it was in many of the readings I've done on the subject, but they mentioned a lot about alcohol and how many of the prisoners were plied with alcohol, as well as the SS soldiers and officers. And
yeah,
in some ways, it just makes perfect sense, right? You think, of course, you have to
yeah,
be totally fucked up to deal with this every
yeah.
single day.
Lower those the inhibitions and just
Just numb
accept
the
it.
whole
Yeah.
experience,
Hmm.
to almost put yourself in a dreamlike state so that it doesn't seem real what you're
Right.
experiencing.
Right. Or you get to the point of blackout and just, I don't remember. I'm not responsible.
For
You know,
sure.
don't
Yeah.
remember most of it. Yeah,
Yeah. I think that
absolutely.
impulse is very, very understandable.
Hmm. Yeah, it's been an interesting year to say the least, going through all of this and watching the trend in addiction. And so I call people, and I do screenings, and I ask, when did this start? When did this really become a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say a good 8 out of 10 people are, well, it started 8 months ago, and this would have been November, so when the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic hit. And a lot of people, yeah, it started about a year ago right now. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it ties right back into the start of the pandemic and the quarantines and all of that. So it's pretty brutal, and having to cope with it. Some people have done it well, some people haven't. But I think that really ties back in, Billy, to that facing inward and taking care of yourself and being a little bit insular, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and focusing what's really right in front of you, because we've lost a lot of those connections. And right now they're tenuous at best. They're all digital. They're
Yeah.
electrical. So you don't have that physical closeness that I think is really important, to be in that same space, face to face. And we do become um since we become more focused on ourselves, we have actually become more hostile to other people accidentally, because now everybody is a threat. I don't know if you have COVID, you could kill me.
Mm-hmm.
I could get it and kill my sweet grandmother. Thank goodness she's already dead, so that's not an issue. But just saying,
Yeah.
it's we become hostile towards each other even more so. And then you add on the political climate and everything, and these conspiracy theories, and we've just become generally unkind towards each other, and it's heartbreaking. We don't notice it happening. But what else are we going to do unless we recognize it and make an effort to change it, and really focus on the positivity between each other and our interactions, and extending maybe beyond ourselves and our family to our community. And that's something I've really noticed in countries that have dealt with the pandemic a lot better. They seem to have a much stronger sense of community, like
Mm-hmm.
wanting to take care of their neighbors, and are willing to do what they have to do in order to do that, wearing masks, staying home. And a lot of them happen to be more authoritarian countries too.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's people are wanting to look out for each other, whereas in a lot of Western cultures, we're very focused on the individual and ourselves, and how we're unique, and we have freedoms to do what we want. And the community, sure, but doesn't really matter. That's it's about me.
Certainly. I think it's very hard to tell where to inject those notions into our culture. Um, I was walking past the television not too long ago, and I overheard a guy talking about why things were so bad in America versus other countries. And he uttered this phrase, which sounded very strange to me. He said, because of America's bizarre obsession with freedom, dot, 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 dot. And I thought, a bizarre obsession with freedom? Is an obsession with freedom bizarre? And I honestly in many ways feel like, from an outside point of view, I'm sure you could see that obsession as bizarre, but to your average American, I would think that that obsession is what makes us American. It is, it's at the heart of everything we are. And so to call that a bizarre obsession, I think is, I don't know, maybe tactless is the right word, but it doesn't compute with me. I think that obsession with freedom is a great thing. We couldn't have gotten this far without it. That I don't. In other words, like I don't think that that's at the root of our problem. Do you think it is?
I
Maybe
think,
I'm wrong.
and I don't know, when you said it, I was like, yeah, I could see that. It is a bizarre obsession. Like, our democracy is based around it. It should be given and inherent that we do have this freedom. But I think because to so many people that means something different. Like, for some people it means you can own as many guns as you want. For some people it means you can have an abortion. So what freedom looks like is different to certain people,
Mm-hmm.
and their core values and beliefs and background and religion, and et cetera, et cetera. And we do obsess about it, and now it's become kind of a dirty word, like freedom. I can do what I want. Like, it's more now taken on this stigma of being for people who are very much, minimal government. I hate to say it, a lot of QAnon people are very much into freedom. Like I love freedom. Freedom's great. I've been to places where there isn't the same kind of freedom we experience, and it's stressful and disconcerting to be in a place like that, because you look around, you see there's armed guards standing there with machine guns on the roundabout on the street, just
Mm-hmm.
because they're monitoring everything all the time. Places, things like YouTube are blocked, from their internet,
Yeah.
so they can't view whatever they want. So I am a big proponent of freedom, but we've weaponized the word in a sense, I think, or at least stigmatized it, and that it is for the crazy people who want so much freedom that it's just lawlessness, that they don't want the government to do anything but fight wars. They want our government to be a foreign government and not a domestic policy government, and just let us do whatever. And I think that there's a certain scary radical aspect now associated with it. I mean, you go to Europe and they think we're bananas for playing our national anthem at every single sporting event. How much we, I won't say glorify, but maybe give tribute to the military and veterans, like having a vet, they're honoring a veteran at every single sporting event, and
Mm-hmm.
all the military discounts and everything. And that's really bizarre to them. So there is that American exceptionalism that
Mm-hmm.
really comes into play. And I think maybe that's what that gentleman was talking about. Our bizarre obsession with freedom is more of our notion of American exceptionalism.
I should also preface too that the guy who said it too is American. He wasn't a foreign correspondent. I think I can understand how somebody who's not American would view it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you are an American and I can't pretend that I understand our cultures. I mean, I do, to the extent of like I'm born and raised here, and it's very much in my DNA in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't answer all these questions as to why they are these ways, like why the national anthem at every sporting event, and why this lionization of the military when other countries don't have that. I mentioned Major Danny's article about Afghanistan, but he, as a veteran, he's written a lot about this stuff as well. That we don't, when you go to these sporting events, like how often do they, salute, teachers or nurses or
Mm-hmm.
janitors for that matter?
Yeah.
Never, right? Never. They only seem to venerate soldiers. And I keep thinking about this too, about like the television commercials for like the National Guard and stuff, and how
Mm-hmm.
slick and how sexy they make this look. And it's like, it must be really shitty if you have to go through this much trouble to make it look that cool. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, who are they fooling? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they are not appealing to a sense of duty. They are not appealing to a sense of love for one's country. They are appealing to your individualism and to
Your
your
ego.
desire to, yeah, your desire to essentially give yourself up to something bigger, because like the commercials for the military that I've seen lately, they are meant to sort of be a counter narrative to the same commercials that Facebook puts out for their virtual reality devices. They are essentially saying, why check out? Why join virtual reality when you can be part of the best fighting force in the world? And then, but the commercial it looks like a video game, right? Like they're giving
Yeah.
you these counter narratives of saying, stop just staring at your screen all day, join the military. However, they're using this selling mechanism that looks like you're staring at a screen and you're playing a video game, right?
Right.
And it's very, very clever and yet very distressing at the same time, I think, right? Like, why do you
Yeah.
have to advertise this heavily and in this gross kind of way? If we really do care that much, if we really do
Mhm.
love our military that much, if we really do love our country that much, why do you have to stoop to such levels?
I think it's always been there though, in some form of propaganda. I mean, looking at old recruiting posters, I mean, there is a lot of guilting, but also glorifying of, you will be our country's hero by joining, come home to your loved ones a hero. And
Mm-hmm.
it's always been there. Of course, there's the draft. So people who didn't want to go, which I have a question about that for you in a second. So put a pin in it. So I think there's always been this glorifying of of joining the service, because they want people who want to be there, because they're going to be better soldiers, they're going to be better leaders overall. They chose to be here. Now people, I don't know, if anytime I go somewhere I don't want to be, I'm not thrilled, and I'm going to do as minimal as possible, like going to the DMV. I'm not going to be I'm going to be nice, but I'm not going to like really put my all into it. I'm just bare minimum, just do what you got to do, get out. I'm not going to hang around and chat with people. So terrible example, but everybody uses the DMV as their example. So we'll go with it. But a lot of these traditions that you talk about, I feel like the whole extreme freedom that we talk about, the bizarre obsession, if you will, that has come out of it, not just obsession, but bizarre obsession, I think really came after 9/11. That was, I think, when it really all started, at least from what I can understand. And then before that, I mean, you have these traditions come into play based on politics. So the national anthem being played all the time, I can't remember when, but I want to say it happened in the 20th century. And it may be during our time of isolationism back in the 20s. I may be completely incorrect, but I know Thanksgiving, what we know today as our modern holiday, came about in the 1930s, 1940s with
Mhm.
FDR, trying to make it this national American holiday that people could really rally around and boost their spirits during this really bleak time of the Great Depression and then subsequently World War II. So it comes out of politics and cultural need at the time. Adding God into the Pledge of Allegiance, I don't think it was always there. But again, you have people who are very religious in power, and they want to inject that in there. And so again, it's a representation of culture at our time. That may have happened during McCarthyism. I think that is when the anti-communist movement was going on, and not being religious was seen as being a communist, so they
Mhm.
inject those things into it. So those traditions come from a place of political, I think, disruption, or economic disruption a lot of
Mhm.
times.
A fear of it.
Hmm.
I mean, I think it might go back further too. Our founding fathers, arguably, were not believers. I mean, some among them, and so it seems that but they recognize the importance of religion,
Hmm.
and it seems like even our society back then was pretty pluralistic in terms of religion, a lot of different ones,
Yeah.
and so in order to unify any group of people, you almost had to be pretty secular. You almost
Hmm.
had to kind of dance around each of those religions
Yeah.
and accept all of them. I mean, Washington famously, at the outset of the war, would go to many different denominations.
Yeah.
Every Sunday, a different denomination. Stuff like that. So
Know that.
yeah, so I mean, I think that they understood the power of like why it was important to people, and politically, they understood the importance
Mhm.
of trying to appeal to everybody's the majority's love of Christ through their different lenses, of
Right.
course.
I mean, you can go all the way back to ancient Rome. They did the exact same thing when they were starting to conquer everything. They didn't try to convert people. They're like, here's our religion, but you're cool to do yours. You might have to
Yeah,
pay a little bit more taxes for it. That's fine.
yeah,
They incorporated everybody, and that's where a lot of the Jewish populations were kept safe for a lot of reasons, because they were the money lenders, and that was it was in the Muslim world, excuse me, in the medieval
hmm,
times. They were kept safe because they were money lenders, and that was not okay by several religions, but they were needed. So again, they were just taxed a little bit more, and then they were left alone for the most part.
right.
That the history doesn't always doesn't always let that happen, but for the most part in those times, yeah, it's letting people be because it makes them stronger, that diversity. For whatever reason, whether it's a means to an end by the majority, by the conquering power,
Yeah,
allowing that diversity does in the end make them much, much, much stronger.
absolutely. I was speaking to my last guest about this a little bit too. I read the book Destiny Disrupted about the beginnings of the Muslim religion, and also
Mhm.
how um, if you were to read a social studies book from a Muslim person's point of view, how it might look, right? Because their religion was, well, enormous, and
Yeah.
took over at one point. It still does a huge swath of the planet, right? And so if we were to look at the world through their point of view, But the author was mentioning in the early days how, some of their earliest conquests and some of the successes attributed to them were that they did not destroy the temples of other religions, such as the
Mhm.
Jews, or even the Christians. They instead had this idea that, as my last guest pointed out, a tenant of AA, right? Attraction rather than promotion. Their idea was to just be the paragons of good living, and that these
Mhm.
people would all of a sudden want to be a part of the Muslim faith because they'd see how
Right.
great these people live. And I think that that's in many ways what Americans at different phases in our country's history thought kind of the same thing, right? That we
Yeah.
at one point famously the beacon of hope, people would flock to our shores because of an attraction, right?
Right.
They wanted to be a part of this. And at some point, and we can make arguments as to when this was introduced, how often, and to what degree. But there's also, of course, the rejection of that promotion rather than attraction.
Which is a really interesting, I guess, juxtaposition paradigm paradox of this American exceptionalism. We are free, we have democracy, but not all of you get to participate.
Mhm.
It's that we are based on this freedom, and we want to spread democracy all over the world, but we don't really want to share ours. We keep that to ourselves,
Yeah.
but everybody else has to have that American democracy. And I think that goes back to that American exceptionalism. And I feel like with our country being so young, we can kind of trace it back to the early 1900s with our start of colonization, of American colonization, not the British coming here and colonizing. It's as an American USA entity. So, and I think that really starts with, was it the Spanish War and everything with Theodore Roosevelt and them going out and doing these conquests. And I think that's where that American exceptionalism comes in, and that need to quote unquote spread American democracy, but it's really always been for our gain,
Hmm.
but we don't want those people we conquer to come here. They should just stay where they're at because we don't want to share whatever we have here. So it is that paradigm, that beacon of hope, bring all your huddled masses, but really don't.
Yeah.
We put out the idea so we look like the good guys, but we don't really mean it. So
Well, I mean, you living in the South, do you get a sense at all that other Southerners really, have their own version? I mean, I think of course this is probably true, but to what extent do they have a sense of their own culture versus, as in oppositional to
mhm.
the rest of the country or other parts of the country?
Sure, it's hard to say from personal experience in my day to day, just because I live in Nashville. It's a liberal bubble. I have spoken with other people, from more rural areas or who may have definitely different ideological views and religions and political stances than myself. But we don't bring that stuff up for a very, very good reason. Like and that's the thing is I found that I went to Mississippi to visit a friend who he's a homosexual man, grew up in rural Indiana, rural Mississippi. You can imagine that did not go great. So he's left with a lot of trauma and an addiction, as you do. So I met his family who are very much Trump supporters, but just the nicest people. Like our friend, the battery in the car died, and they cleaned up the battery, jump started it, ended up dying again. A family friend came out and jumped the car like in 5 minutes. Didn't have to call AAA. Like it was that kind of community, and you just helped each other, and they were lovely, amazing people, but you had to compartmentalize them a little bit, and really that's something that I've come to learn a lot with living down here, is that what's going on in these rural communities with the conspiracy theories, with the more extreme right wing kind of ideologies, it's really not their fault. They get stuck in their own echo chamber. And if I was someone down in the South from here, and all these people in these cities and up north just keep, excuse my language, shitting on me and my culture and my beliefs and thinking they're better than me, I'm going to stop believing them when it comes to science, when it comes to education, when it comes to these policies, because, they don't care about me. They don't think about me. So why would it be reflected in their policies? And I think that that's a big part of the disconnect. And then, of course, the inherent racism that happens. A lot of people aren't actively or aggressively racist. It's just a very casual thing that's part of their upbringing. And again, and my friend's father said this, the gentleman out in Mississippi that was helping us out with car troubles, let us borrow his truck. Had an anecdote about an African American person that, got stuck on the road, stop to help them out, saying so lovely, very nice person, but give him the shirt off his back. But then there's this separate, again, compartmentalization of, there's this other whole unknown entity that is evil and trying to take over, and these social cultural movements that will maybe somehow affect their way of life. So because they don't see it every day, they don't see diversity, they don't see people of color, they have brain drains in their town. And I think that's where a lot of people are just becoming jaded, and feeling like they're an other. And when you become an other, you kind of have to go on the offense in a sense. You're on defense, and then you have to say, well, I'm not going to be taking this anymore. We're gonna do our own thing. So I think there is that disconnect. A lot of people that I speak with on the phone from the South, I mean, people have dropped in hints of this otherness, and then some people are blatantly just, we were talking about the snowstorms down in Texas, and like how horrible they were. And this lady lived down there, and she said, yeah, it's fine, we can feed everybody at the border and clothe them and shelter them, but we can't give our own people warmth and power and food. And you hear that and you're just like, and so I just stopped, and I didn't want to argue with her or anything, but I said, yeah, but we really do have the resources to do that for everybody. So just saying, it's not about us or them. It's just about, being this, if this is the idea of freedom and being American and exceptionalism, we have the ability to take care of everyone, and there is no need for this separation, but we think there is. But yeah, living in the South, it's definitely opened my eyes and been taught me to be a little bit more kind-hearted towards people who have these very, very different views from myself.
So it's funny. So Trump was right. There are good people on both sides.
I mean, maybe the one thing he was right about. There really are.
You can't help but think about that stuff, right? I mean, I think about that stuff a lot. I had a clip on one of my podcasts not too long ago when I interviewed the gentleman who runs the John Wayne Birthplace Museum in Iowa. And I incorporated this clip of John Wayne saying how much he hates the idea of, so he was asked, what about the civil rights movement? And he immediately responds, kind of chides it with his tone with, what about the civil rights movement?
Right.
And he kind of goes on to explain, I don't like the idea of hyphenated Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, or just Americans, damn it. And it's funny because, I think a lot of people are very dismissive of that guy as a bit of a racist. And yet I seem to remember Barack Obama saying almost the exact same thing in one of his early speeches, right? And is kind of hailed as a bit of a, I don't know, an enlightened person for those views.
Yeah.
And again, Trump is derided for basically saying the same thing that you're saying. And I think everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think it's true. I've said it on this podcast too. I had grandparents who were definitely racist, but were the sweetest people you could ever meet. So how both things are kind of true, right? And I do feel like, now that there's there's certainly this idea that we need to purge all racist tendencies. I understand that impulse. And yet at the same time, I'm wondering, can that be done? Can it be done?
No, never.
I don't think so either. And I think if we have to kind of accept these dualities, we have to accept these paradoxes, right? That there are racists who are nice people. You have to accept those paradoxes, right? Like, you cannot just accept the face of racism as a Klansman with a torch or a Nazi with an oven.
Yes.
Not all that simple and that black and white.
Right, right. And it's again, it's there's that you've always grown up in this. This is just the, I won't say the way it is, but again, there's, I think there's a difference between racism and ignorance based on your uh, resources available. Again, the level of education you had, the access to, or the quality of education. People in these rural areas, half of them don't even have internet. So how are
Mhm.
you supposed to do this research if all you're getting is satellite TV and people tune into Fox or Max News? I don't even know if that's actually a
Mhm.
channel, but you see what I'm saying though? You get
Yeah.
limited information, and again, you don't see people outside of your community. And if you do, they're from another community next door, basically, or town over, and they're the exact same. They're all white, they're all,
Mhm.
you probably lower to middle class, and I don't want to generalize too much, or very poor. Either way, it doesn't, the socioeconomic status, I feel in this case, isn't the most important thing. But it's more about exposure, and those people are, I, not to quote Louis C.K., but to quote Louis C.K., maybe not accidentally racist, but it's just there, but it's not angry, it's not focused. They would still help these people, but then, and those people I kind of give a pass. Ignorance, it's not their fault, they're ignorant. You don't know what you don't know, and if you
Yeah.
don't have anyone to teach you or show you, then you don't know. And that's fine. We should do our best to reach out to these communities and build these bridges. But then you have the people who are, part of the Proud Boys and the Klan, and that is actively aggressive racism. And I
Yes.
think that's what we're really trying to get rid of. But what we're going to be able to get rid of more easily, I think, is that cultural, being ingrained racism is
Mhm.
I don't say enlightening people. It makes it sound like they have no capability of learning, but just exposing people a little bit more to everything and having these healthy conversations.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, but there has to be some sort of filtration, I guess, too. I think because as you mentioned, the rural areas not having access to some of this information. I also feel like there's certainly a drawback to too much information, right? Information without
Mhm.
context, right? And so, like in some ways, I couldn't help but think those people are in a way lucky that they are dealing only with what's in front of them. They're dealing only
Yeah.
with their communities, whether it's all white, all black,
Yeah.
whatever, like they're dealing with what's right in front of them day to day. And so in many ways, like they don't need to know about the Black Lives Matter movement. They don't need to know about the
Yeah.
protests. They don't need to know about the assault on the Capitol. It has nothing to do with their day-to-day lives, right? Like
Hmm.
they're dealing with what they're dealing with. And in so many ways, I don't know if I'm getting to the point where I'm getting more like isolationist in my thinking, but I am beginning to think this country's too goddamn big. Like it's just too
Yeah.
big, and it cannot accommodate all these thoughts. It just can't.
Right.
I'm really beginning to think that, and that we really need to maybe break it up into separate countries or separate, territories
Full
because it's
on,
just
yeah,
getting too
territories.
much.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, was the point of the states, but just again with the ability to have mass transit,
Hmm.
those ideas flow over so from state to state to state. I think territories would be a great idea. I joke, I'm like, we should have just let the South stay the South. I don't, or let Texas just stay Texas, like but then it's like, okay, well, what about slavery? I'm like, yes, I understand, but you
Well,
know,
but as old Ron Paul brought up too, right? Like the rest of the world was able to give up slavery without a civil war. I mean, there are certain conditions that could have been imposed to maybe have gotten the South to give up their slavery without a
yeah.
war if we had just given them their own country, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ideally that would have been the way to go, but I still feel like it would just have been so much worse for people who were enslaved. So, grateful for the Civil War in a lot of senses, but I think that really did show that fracture
Hmm.
in this country that has never gone away. And I know this topic has pretty much been beaten to death about how that still reflects in our society and everything that's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement. But the problem with that idea that people don't need to be informed about it for their day to day is that they can still vote. They
Hmm.
still have a voice at the highest level. And that's where that becomes a problem, where people aren't informed, where people just do what they're supposed to do, what they've always done, what they're taught to do, and don't question it or don't think about it. There's been policies that have come up that I'm like, yeah, I fully believe in that. And it's more, conservative leaning. Like, I agree with that, but I don't agree with it enough for it to change my entire vote. I was speaking with someone about this the other day about how she was appalled that one of her friends was going to vote for Trump in this last election,
Mm-hmm.
not in 2016. And again, you surround yourself with other liberals or conservatives, you just kind of assume that everyone is. I have a bad habit of doing that to this day.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll open my mouth and say something and find out that person is not on the same ideological
Me too.
level. And I told her, I'm like, when you find someone and you ask, why are you voting for someone who is somewhat extreme in a lot of these views, there's always one thing. People like, I don't, gay marriage is fine. I believe in helping out the poor people, but it's always one thing. It's going to be immigration, gun laws, abortion. I mean, it's one hot item or one hot ticket item that will make them go in one direction. Whereas I feel like maybe some more of the liberal left-wing people take a more holistic view. So if you feel that passionately about something, you're willing to go against everything else you believe because of that one thing. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's kind of that separation is
I
the
know what you mean.
ideologies.
And I think that, you said something earlier about, we have enough. And there's this part of me that's like, but do we? I mean, I don't know if we do. I mean, I feel like I can say that because I feel like I have enough, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's easy. And I think a lot of liberals, kind of think along those lines, right? Of like, well, we have enough for everybody. And I really wonder if we do. And I really wonder if I talk to more poor people of any color, if they would agree with that we really do, and I think most of them would probably say like, no, like those people in Texas, right? Like,
Yeah.
why are we not? I totally understand where they're coming from and totally
Yeah.
sympathize with that as to like, why aren't we taking care of those people? They are Americans. And and it's funny because I'm actually going to have an immigration lawyer on next. You're going to be
Oh,
sandwiched
wonderful.
in between a former punk rock singer and
Love it.
immigration lawyer. And I am curious about that because I feel like, I'm a very open-minded and liberal guy, and what's
Mhm.
happening at the border really appalls me. But I also feel like, on the other hand, we have to be very serious and talk about, like, do we have enough? How do we allocate these things? How do we have to have some kind of comprehensive border strategy? Like, we just have to.
Right.
And it has to be all inclusive. Like, it can't just be walls and machine guns and get the
No,
fuck out
there has to be a
mentality.
process.
There has to be a lot of stuff, right? Like, we have to
Mm.
look at our budget. We have to look at the messaging that we send out to the world. We have to look at a lot of things. What the hell is it we're exactly offering people that makes them
Mhm.
want to come here? What among those things can we actually give to other Americans? I was watching this, like, to America in terms of jobs, in terms of
Mhm.
healthcare. I was watching this documentary too not long ago that was made in, I think, 1984. And it was a gentleman who, French director, who just went across the entire country,
Mhm.
from north, south, east, west, and interviewing different immigrants and kind of asking them about their story and such. And he
Mhm.
asked this gentleman from the Middle East, do you miss your home country, et cetera? And he said, like, of course he does. He's like, do you think that America is better? And the guy says, in some way better, and in some way not better. And the guy asked, he asked him, like, well, what is not better? And the guy, without hesitation, he says, um, something to the effect of freedom without direction, and just freedom without direction. And I thought, like, wow, like, that's such an interesting point of view. And it kind
Yeah.
of ties back to what we were saying, this bizarre obsession with freedom without direction, of just too much all over,
Yeah.
and no real sense of meaning, I suppose, and this
Mhm.
guy, of course, is speaking in a mosque. So he has a great sense of meaning in his life and a great sense of
Right.
purpose. Right. But I think that he's kind of onto something with that, is that, like, we don't have a mission statement anymore.
No,
We're, in many ways, we're too pluralistic in that regard, a little too
yeah.
much so, that we're allowing too much of this talk and nothing gets done. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that comes back to that sense of community too. Like, you have East Coast, West Coast, you have North, South. There is this divide, and it comes geographically, which inherently comes with socioeconomic status and race and religion. Like, you got the Catholics, which are like the Baptists of the North, and in the South you got the Baptists, which are like the Catholics of the South. I mean, it's two very different things, both Christianity, but you talk to one or the other and they feel like they're very, very different. And values too, very different for the both of those religions. And then you have a lot more wealth in the North with all the industrialization, and the South is much poorer. And I think when I say there is enough, but only certain people have it, and we do talk about that 98, 99%. We are the wealthiest country in the world. We don't have an excuse. But what's happening is that the distribution of wealth is so ridiculously uneven.
Yeah.
That's where we run into problems. We have the ability
Right.
to have a universal minimum income, which is a very interesting topic in and of itself. We have the ability to give healthcare to everyone. We have the ability to educate everyone.
Right.
There's plenty of land for people to settle and establish new communities and places, and there's plenty of jobs, but we're told that there isn't, and we get really scared of that, and that helps keep us, and I say
Right.
us, the American people, in line, because we're so scared of losing our job and losing our income, because there is no social safety net as the
No.
pandemic has
Yeah.
blown wide open. I'm
Yeah.
like, I've seen it forever. Are the politicians finally seeing it? I don't know, but they're letting the people who have this incredible wealth that is built on the backs of the normal person making $7.50 an hour. So, there are people out there who don't believe in taxes. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of with them on the income tax. Like, if I'm making, $35,000 a year, why the heck am I taxed on that?
Yeah.
My my $300 a year isn't going to make that much of a difference, even if you multiply that by 150 million. But the guy who's making 300,000 a year is going to contribute more. And then you have the guy making 300 million a year, and they're getting taxed, like
Far
nothing.
less. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing.
So, and that's something that I think really put to people of saying, okay, you make 30,000 a year, and you pay 1,000 in taxes. That's money that you could have had,
Yeah.
just that little bit extra to
Yeah.
improve the quality of your life, maybe get an education even. But the guy who's paying, who has $3 million and he pays 1,000, very different. Drop in the bucket. Lunch, that was lunch for him and his buddies, or her and her, whatever, taking the
Yeah.
family out, vacation. It's nothing. And so I think the tax system is absolutely egregious. And there's lots of arguments why it should stay the way it is and why it needs to change, but we do have the most money in the world, and that money is accumulated on the backs of the poor working class. Essentially, us peasants make the wealthy wealthier, and they have, to me, a responsibility to pay that back. We've given them so much. Now it's time for them to take care of us. To say it's a democracy, I think, is really false. It's an oligarchy. It's an aristocracy. You just don't have the big family names unless it's like the Kennedys or the Bushes, but they're there. We have the
Hmm.
Johnson family for Johnson and Johnson. They're a big part of this
Hmm.
oligarchy and working behind the scenes that nobody sees. I know we've had this conversation before of who controls everything. It's not this like shady deep state stuff. It's just the wealthy. Follow the money and you're going to find out who's running
Oh,
everything.
yes. I mean, mark my
So,
words, 100 years from now, instead of the 50 stars, we're going to have those little smiley face Amazon logos.
no doubt.
No
No
doubt.
doubt.
So
So,
as we wrap up, what do you want to talk about with this draft business?
oh gosh, now I'm going to have to circle back to that. Oh, would the draft work today? Could we do it with this individualism? I mean, we saw it crumbling during the Vietnam War, and
Yeah.
that's the last time we've had the draft. And I say this because I was going to apply for a job on a federal government job out in DC, and I was doing that today. And there was a box that you checked: Are you enrolled for selective service
Yeah.
as a man? These certain ages, and the fact that that is still even a thing blows my mind. And should women be included in it? Again, another topic for another time, but we saw that crumbling during the Vietnam War. World War II, no
Mhm.
problem. People were like, I'm there.
Mhm.
You know what? I may not be like the first to sign up, but I'm proud to still go. And then Vietnam, people are like, absolutely not. Now, granted, different wars, different reasons, but still, I think had that same war been happening 20 years before that, they would have still had that same patriotism. And then we started getting pushed to this individualism.
Mhm.
Again, I think it's a push away from communism, which is communism, community, group, whole. If you're pushed towards being an individual, like Ayn Rand is all about,
Mhm.
then you don't come together. You can't come together and for these big causes. And so I think with the Secret Service, the draft, I think it would just completely not work today. I think people would be like, no, why should I be selected? That I don't believe in it. I don't want to go. And it just wouldn't work. I don't think it
Well,
happened.
a lot of a lot of people have kind of said that had we had the draft after 9/11, there would have been no war in Iraq, right? Like nobody would have signed on to something like that.
Mhm.
And so I think and I agree with that. I think, in other words, I think that pushback against Vietnam, of course, I think was very legitimate because we went to that war for very illegitimate reasons.
Mhm.
And I mean, so like I was asked recently by a student, I think the first time anybody ever asked me, why didn't you go to Iraq after 9/11? Why didn't you join the army?
Wow. Mhm.
And I had to really think about it. And with all due respect to people who did go, my cousins included,
Mhm.
I told them I didn't want to die in a sandbox for oil. Like, I mean,
Right?
but I knew it then. Even
Mhm.
18-year-old me, like I knew that's what it was really about.
Yeah.
And no draft would have gotten me to go, unless I started to see friends go. And I don't think I could just let them go and me not go, at least
Right.
not without protest. So I think in many ways, like the draft is important for that, right? Because it forces people to question the legitimacy of the war itself.
Okay.
But I do also on that, I understand what you're saying. And I think, the short answer is it depends on the war, right? I mean, if we were
Mhm.
attacked, if there was a real existential threat that we all perceived and believed in, yeah,
Right.
of course we would go. I think the draft. What I worry about though too is again, all anecdotal from my work with them. As much as I love them, I don't see most of our 18-year-olds. I wonder just like how they will have the wherewithal to do anything. Could we peel
Yeah.
them away from their video games and their iPhones long enough to fight a conflict?
Or to care about it in the first place or
I
know that it's
really,
happening.
I really wonder if we can do that. I really wonder like how to
Yeah.
marshal those kinds of forces.
Mhm.
If
And
China invaded today, could we really pull ourselves together enough to care
right.
enough to do anything about it? Would a
Yeah.
draft at that point, does a draft even matter? Would anyone show up?
Yeah.
Forget protest, forget anything. Just would they even bother?
Yeah. The militia would, these little self-formed militias would very much show up and be very happy to do that job, but they wouldn't be signing up for the US Army. They're going to do their own little thing and, use history as an example of, well, it's just like the Revolutionary War. We have this foreign enemy on our soil, and it was militias
Mhm.
that came together to beat it. And you just have to shake your head a little bit, maybe roll your eyes, and just be like, that's not how it would work in modern warfare by any means.
Right.
So yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the 18-year-olds and where they're at and their mentality. I think it is so different. I don't think kids grow up nearly as fast as they used
Mhm.
to. I mean, it's obvious, and I
Ourselves
don't.
included, I
Yeah,
think.
I don't care what people say, whether it's good or bad, or if they're too soft, quote unquote. I don't think that that's really even relevant. They're just not growing up as fast, which is good because we have longer lives as is. Why not enjoy being more comfortable and safe as a kid? But
Yeah.
when I was 18, a lot of the people I went to high school with, I'm like, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to trust them with a gun, but with the right training at the age of 18, I think they could do well in that environment. But a lot of the other 18-year-olds I know now, like I know a whole slew of them or something, the ones that I have worked with and spoken to absolutely would not feel like they would even survive in the atmosphere of boot camp. let alone going to war. So it's changed so much, even since our generation, the elder millennials, if you will.
We are a flabby culture.
That indeed.
Karla, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. That totally went a different way than I thought, but I listen to too much NPR, so it's on my brain. Seriously, like socioeconomic disparities take up way more of my brain than it ever should. So
Me as well.